So let's talk about 802.3 networks. 802.3 networks refer to Ethernet. I spend most of my time wiring Ethernet networks, and in particular 10-base FOO networks of various kinds. As the name might suggest, the maximum theoretical speed of a 10-base network was 10 megabits per second. In practice, it was maybe a little more than half of that. One was called 10-base 5. I never actually pulled any 10-base 5 cable. It was already obsolete when I started doing stuff. But it was coaxial. Coaxial means that it has a cable inside of a wire mesh that acts like another cable. The wires share the same axis. That's coaxial. It's a lot like a cable TV cable, except 10-base 5 cabling was fucking hugely fat. It also used this medieval tapping system where you actually punctured a perfectly good piece of coax with something called a vampire tap whenever you wanted to put a computer on the network. Or sometimes it did have connectors called end connectors that you crimped onto one end of a cable and plugged in the station to. The vampire tap, or the end connector, connected to this sort of dongle thing that was called an AUI, an attachment unit you can look it up. The AUI had a 15-pin D-sub connector on it that was a lot like a PC joystick. And then a 15-pin cable connected the AUI to another 15-pin jack on the back of the computer, the network card. The network was physically a bus, and due to this medieval vampire tapping stuff, sometimes it just consisted of a single physical wire, like literally like just a big ass wire that they just snaked around the building, and they just jammed this vampire shit into it. That was the whole network. Each of the ends of the cable had a terminator on it, which was just a resistor that connected the two strands of wire, connected the wire mesh to the inside of the coax. And if either end of the cable didn't have the terminator, or the cabling somehow got cut somewhere, or it was, it had the end connectors on it, somebody unscrewed it, the whole network went down. By the time I got in, 10-base 5 was out, but there was still something around called 10-base 2, and I ran a lot of this. It was logically identical to 10-base 5, just physically different. It was still coax. It was still in a bus topology, so if you unplug something, the whole network went down. The coax cabling itself for 10-base 2 is called RG58, and it looked a lot like cable television cable. It was a little thinner, and instead of those medieval taps, it actually always used connectors. There was something called a T connector that plugged in the computer, and then individual runs of wire ran from computer to computer, but it was still a bus. They ran in a big long line. You can imagine them just sitting right next to each other. You go to computer 1, there's a cable from computer 1 to computer 2. There's a T connector that plugs into computer 2. There's another cable from computer 2 to computer 3. There's a T connector, etc., etc. There's still terminators. There's still 50 ohms. They still do the same thing. Connectors weren't the same as either 10-base 5 or cable TV connectors. Instead, they use these things called BNC connectors. They're just easier to turn. You just turn them once and they connect. So since it was in a bus topology, these networks went down a lot because, people unplug stuff. It happens. So it wasn't ideal. But that brings us to the big daddy. The most requested, the most popular, the Hulk Hogan of Ethernet is 10-base T. This is Ethernet over twisted pair. You'd find it totally recognizable if you saw it today. As a matter of fact, if you saw the cabling today, you would find it indistinguishable from the kind of cabling that you have in, probably at your feet. And later there were things like 100-base T and 100-base VG and some other standards that died. And these days there's gigabit Ethernet and 2.5 gigabit and whatever, 10 gigabit. I don't even know what it is these days. But in my day, I mostly dealt with 10-base T. That ran at 10 megabits per second and was otherwise exactly the same as 10-base 2. It ran at the same speeds, did the same thing. It was just in a star. Each cable led from the computer that wanted to connect to the network to something called a hub. And you know exactly what this is. It's exactly what you think of today when you think of, I need to plug my computer in the network. Eventually it gets to a port on a switch these days, but in those days it was called a hub. I mean, you can connect two stations together with a crossover cable, just like you can today. So you can go station to station, but in reality, on a real network, every station connects to a hub. The advantage of having a star was that disconnecting one cable doesn't take the entire network down. So like I said, different categories of cabling existed. Like there's category 3, 4, 5, 6. These advertise themselves as for different speeds of Ethernet over time. I think the physical difference between them is they have like different amounts of twists per foot and they're arranged differently, so they do different attenuation. But in practice, I've found that it doesn't really make much of a difference. Like if you have 8 conductors and they're made out of like rusty chain link or or barbed wire. Ethernet usually just works. So conductors are these little strands of wire that themselves have jackets on them, little tiny jackets, but there's a big jacket on the outside. Each one of these conductors has a color. Actually, they have two colors. Each has a major color and a minor color. Like white-orange means mostly white with some orange stripes on it. And that means like the major color is white and the minor is orange. And orange-white means mostly orange with white stripes. Usually the white stripe ones look more like their primary color. When you talk about them, you can leave their stripe off because it's always white. So the colors are white, orange, orange, white, green, green, white, blue, blue, white, brown, brown. So there are 8 of them. So the connector of an Ethernet cable, it's called an RJ45. And usually I call it a plug if it's male and a jack if it's female, but I just usually call it the plug connector. It doesn't really matter. When you make an Ethernet cable, the conductors, they don't just go in any old willy-nilly order in the connector. They go in a specific order. It's called the EIA something or other that I forget. But there's a very specific order to it. And the order is white, orange, orange, white, green, blue, white, blue, green, white, brown, brown. Now I know this because I've made tens of thousands of them. I owned a computer cabling company. Everyone I knew was helping me make them at some point. My mom, my sister, my friends. I even contracted students at the local Votech who hated me. I needed them to help me make them because I got an order for something like 20,000 of them one time. I have absolutely no memory of whom I sold them to. It was fucking awful. It was terrible. It was like worse than delivering Shopper's Guide, which I also did. I'm not a very good sweatshop runner. I don't think I made any money. But I will be able to recite the order of those conductors until I die. So you test them using one of these cheap-ass link testers. This one died long ago, but I guess it was apparently the third one I bought. Often these things lie. They're not always honest. So far I've been talking about patch cables and connectors and really short runs of cabling. I should probably mention that the cabling company I owned, I just didn't make these cables pre-made for connecting the computer to your wall. I would also come to your business and pull cabling. The way I got into this, in 1993, I worked at a company in Philadelphia called Cable and Chips. They would make you like custom computer cabling in an hour. It was a thing. Like there was no such thing as standard. So like everybody had a different kind of printer, and you need a different kind of cable for different serial printers, and USB wasn't a thing. This is a long time ago. The value proposition of this business is that we would make you a custom computer cable in an hour. We would charge a ridiculous amount of money. You'd only need to sell like 2 cables a day to pay for the rent. I worked sales at this company, and eventually I quit and I started my own company because I could. So I also stole a customer, and this customer is called North American Publishing Company, or NAPCO. They sold magazine subscriptions. It took up a huge floor of a building on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia. They had lots of computers and lots of cabling needs, and my contact there was a Sphinx-like guy named Bob Gibbons. I only really dealt with him a couple times. On my first post-sale visit, Bob kind of passed me off as quick as he could to NAPCO's data processing manager, a guy named Gary Engel. I was in a suit. I was in sales mode. So Gary and I having met 5 minutes earlier, walking down the main hallway of this huge business, and I kind of just expected that he would point me at a place that the cabling needed to be run from and to, but Gary didn't do that. As we walked in this hallway, I'm on my best behavior. I'm in my very olive 90s suit. And as we walked down the hallway, Gary said to me, my boss is in the hospital. And so I said, wow, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What happened to him? And Gary said to me with a completely straight face, he had his head surgically implanted in his ass. This is a true story. Gary and I are still friends to this day. Gary don't give a fuck. He once pointed at a middle-aged woman and told me to run an Ethernet cable to that bag of rocks over there. Run cable I didn't need to do. And because that cable at NAPCO went in a drop ceiling above the big hallway in the place, or all around the building really, I needed to run plenum cable. And plenum cable isn't any particular kind of data transfer. It's not a category cable. It has to do with the jacketing. The jacketing, if it starts to burn, it causes less damage if it's inhaled. I think that's it anyway, and it might be more fire resistant or something. It has to do with fire. When you pull cable in a building, you want to use plenum cable because fire. In any case, folks, I'm just rambling here. I'm just having fun. Thanks for listening.